Again, welcome back and good morning. Thank you. I'm a person who often thinks with my heart first and my head second. I tend to see the world through emotions and feelings. We may call it intuition. Sometimes I see things differently than others. And when my heart and my head can't get into alignment, I usually end up following my heart. For example, years ago when I decided to run barefoot due to injuries, I knew it didn't make sense, and people thought I was crazy, but I loved running so much that I was willing to try anything. And if I had followed conventional thinking, I wouldn't be running today. When I decided to ask my wife to marry me after only 6 weeks of dating, I knew it didn't make sense, and yes, people thought I was crazy. However, after 30 years of marriage, I can safely say we made the right decision. When I finally listened to God's call to become a priest, at that time in my life, my mid-40s, it didn't make sense. And some people actually laughed at the thought of my being a priest. Nevertheless, I followed my heart, and my life has taken on an entirely new meaning. And I learned that sometimes the most important decisions don't always make sense. For example, forgiving someone for an offense doesn't make sense. Surrendering power doesn't make sense. Giving the last dollar in your pocket to a beggar doesn't make sense. Trying to live a life of compassion doesn't make sense, but it makes for a wonderful community. So what I've learned in life, that the most enriching decisions are the ones that make the least amount of sense. And one of my favorite biblical citations comes from the Book of Deuteronomy, in which Moses has just delivered all the commandments, all of them, not just the 10, all 613 of them. And Moses was offering a commentary on these rules and regulations, these principles of community, which would guide the Israelites to be righteous or to stand right with God. He explains that the essence of these rules, of these laws, in chapter 10 of Deuteronomy, which states, "Circumcise then the foreskin of your heart, and be stubborn no longer, and provide for the orphan, the widow, and the stranger in your midst food and clothing." Moses is telling the people, yes, you must follow the rules and principles, but don't allow your rules and principles to undermine the people they are supposed to serve. He is saying, have enough compassion in your hearts to help others. To help others when there is nothing in it for you. To help others when it may be most inconvenient. Moses is saying that the essence of the rules in the Torah is to have a heart of compassion. Developing a heart of compassion, however, is a lifetime journey. It requires a lifetime of work. It doesn't happen overnight. To develop a heart of compassion, we must first begin to empty the heart of all selfishness. Emptying the heart allows us to make room in our hearts for others. We have to be careful, though. The self constantly wants to take up residency in the heart and to vacate others. As you can see, developing a heart of compassion that has cut away the hardness of the heart requires ongoing work. It also requires making the stranger your neighbor. It requires seeing others as worthy, not emphasizing your own self-esteem, but emphasizing the esteem of others. It requires building others up, not knocking them down. Developing a heart of compassion requires us to see beyond our own needs and to embrace the needs of others as if their hunger was our hunger, as if their thirst was our thirst, as if their need for love was our need for love. Moses understood this and lived into it as he led the Israelites through the wilderness. His state of being enveloped the circumcised heart. And if we look back on the life of Moses, we see that he was born a Hebrew, meant to die at the hand of Pharaoh as an infant. However, the sharp wit of his sister and his mother saved his life, and as a result, he was raised in the household of Pharaoh. After murdering an Egyptian, he flees Egypt, gets married, has a child, and is living the good life until God calls him. Moses, go down to Egypt's land and tell old Pharaoh to set my people free. However, I feel sorry for Moses because he doesn't want the job. In his mind, it doesn't make sense, and Moses offers God some pretty good reasons why he shouldn't be the leader of the Israelites. Nevertheless, much to his chagrin, he accepts God's call and frees the Israelites from Egypt. And once he frees the Israelites from oppression, he leads them through the Sinai wilderness for 40 years. For 40 years in hopes of arriving at the promised land. In the end, poor Moses doesn't even get to enjoy the benefits of the promised land. He dies. He dies never setting foot in the land of milk and honey. And during this 40-year journey with the Israelites, Moses entertains constant complaints, defends the Israelites from God's wrath, and nourishes the Israelites. And he empowers them to be the people they are meant to be. He has compassion to realize that the community is more important than he is. He also has the compassion to ensure that they learn from their mistakes. He provides them discipline when necessary, but more importantly, he shows them how to circumcise the foreskin of their hearts to care for the orphan, the widow, and the stranger. Ultimately, as Moses delivers the commandments to the people, he reminds them that the rules are not to become a simple checkbox approach to community living. But the rules are to be executed with compassion and requires a heart to make enough room for everyone to enter and take residence there. In the grand scheme of things, all that Moses did would not make sense if we simply look through the lens of intellect. His 40 years in the wilderness were very inconvenient. And he left behind a simple life of raising a family, being accepted by a small community, and living the dream. So I wonder as we begin a new semester, a new year, a new decade, how can we carve out more space in our hearts to invite others in so we can come to understand that having relationships with other people may be the most important mark of compassion. All communities need rules and principles. We as a community are very fortunate to have rules that are also our core values, the stripes. Living the stripes, if we are to live them with compassion, must become our state of being. The stripes can't be transactional in nature, meaning if you respect me, then I'll respect you, or I will be generous if there's something in it for me. Living the stripes in the spirit in which they are meant to be lived may not make sense because they require us. They require us, all of us in the community, to circumcise the foreskin of our hearts, which in many situations may not make sense. It may not make sense to be generous. It may not make sense to be honest. It may not make sense to be respectful. It may not make sense to be kind, especially when we are not receiving the same in return. However, for the stripes to be meaningful, and for them to develop within us hearts of compassion, we must come to terms with the reality that the most rewarding decisions we might make in life just may not make any sense. In silence, let us reflect on what we've just heard.